The war beneath the shadows. The alarms of the haven screamed like wounded metal as crimson lights flooded the underground corridors. Every wall trembled under the weight of distant explosions. Frank Maccury stood in the command bay, breathing heavily through his mask. The air smelled of iron, smoke, and fear. "Helix is inside," Raven's voice thundered through the intercom. "No more simulations. This is war." Monitors flashed red all around Annie as she tapped furiously across glowing consoles. Her fingers blurred, decrypting enemy codes faster than the system could process. Sweat trickled down her temple, but her eyes were steady, cold with purpose. "They're breaching Sector 4, she shouted. "Elias, reroute the energy shields, now." Elias' gruff voice answered through static. "On it, kid. But we're outnumbered 3-1. Then the ceiling above shuddered. Dust rained down like gray snow. The ground shook beneath Frank's boots. He looked up, one final inhale, and ran straight into the storm. The tunnels were a blur of motion and fire. Hidden heroes clashed with Helix's black-armored soldiers, blades and gunfire colliding in the flickering blue light. Sparks flew, smoke thickened, and screams echoed off the steel. Frank moved like a ghost, fast, calculated, precise. Every punch, every dodge, every shot was a lesson burned into him by Raven. He rolled across the floor, took down 2 soldiers, and used one's fallen weapon against the others. His mask cracked across the cheek, blood streaking his skin, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Annie's voice echoed in his earpiece, calm but trembling. "Frank, fall back to the main core. They're overriding the doors. I can't stop them much longer." "Not yet," Frank said, panting. "If I don't hold them here, they'll reach you." "Frank!" He cut the line. Meanwhile, Raven and Elias fought side by side at the northern gate. The old heroes moved like a single mind, Raven's strikes precise, Elias' brute strength shattering through armor. The ground beneath them glowed from the plasma weapons residue. "Feels like old times," Elias grunted, reloading. "Old times ended in graves," Raven muttered. "Let's not repeat that." But as the fight raged, something strange flickered on Raven's visor. A heat signature, inside the haven, moving fast, heading straight toward the core room. Annie's room. Raven's heart clenched. "Frank, someone's heading to your sister." But before Frank could answer, his world exploded into chaos. An explosion tore through the corridor, throwing him into a wall. He hit the ground hard, vision fading. When he looked up through the dust, a tall figure stepped out of the flames. Not Helix. Not one of theirs. Someone familiar. "You!" Frank gasped. The man's helmet retracted, revealing Luther, one of Raven's senior lieutenants, the one who had trained beside them for years. Luther's eyes were cold. "Empty." "I told you, Maccury," he said quietly, his voice trembling with something darker than rage. "The nation you protect is a lie. The real heroes died long ago." Frank froze. "You're with Helix." Luther smiled, slow, broken. "No. I am Helix." Before Frank could react, Luther fired. The shot ripped through the air, narrowly missing Frank's head, and blew apart the control panel behind him. The entire tunnel plunged into darkness. Annie watched the lights in her control room die, one by one, until only the main monitor glowed faintly, showing Frank's life signal flicker in and out. "No, no, no," she whispered, pounding the console. "Frank, answer me." Static. Then, faintly, a voice. "Annie, run." The walls cracked. A siren wailed. And through the shattered glass of the observation deck, Annie saw a figure standing in the firelit tunnel, Luther, dragging something behind him. She gasped. It was Raven, unconscious, mask broken, bleeding. Luther lifted his head and looked straight at the observation deck, where Annie stood frozen. His voice echoed through the comms. "It's time the world met its real heroes." The screens behind Annie flickered, hundreds of faces appeared on them, government officials, soldiers, agents, all marked with the Helix insignia. She realized the horrifying truth. Helix wasn't just outside, it had been inside the system all along. Frank forced himself to his feet, dizzy, bleeding, his mask cracked in half. He could hear Annie's terrified voice echoing through the destroyed comms. He staggered through the smoke, heart pounding. He reached the shattered observation deck just in time to see Luther holding Raven by the throat, and behind him, more Helix soldiers flooding in. Elias burst in from the corridor, shouting, "Annie, get down!" Gunfire erupted. Sparks rained. Raven dropped to the floor, limp. Frank screamed, diving forward. The world slowed to a crawl, blood, fire, and betrayal merging into one chaotic blur. Luther turned his gaze to Frank, eyes almost sorrowful. "Your father was the beginning," he said. "You'll be the end." And with that, he pressed a button on his gauntlet. The floor beneath them cracked, revealing a dark pit swirling with light and code, the core of the haven itself. A deafening explosion ripped through the base, and then silence. The dust settled. Half of the haven burned in eerie blue light. Frank lay on the ground, barely conscious, reaching out toward Annie's silhouette through the smoke. "Annie!" She didn't move. Luther was gone. Raven was missing. The Helix insignia blinked across every surviving monitor like a taunt. And then, a distorted voice came through the speakers, calm, calculated, familiar. Silence. That was the first thing Frank heard after the explosion. Not the fire, not the sirens, just the hollow, ringing silence that follows chaos. He opened his eyes to a ceiling half gone, the steel bent and glowing red from heat. Smoke rolled across the ruins like fog over a dying battlefield. His breathing was ragged, every inhale sharp with pain. The mask that once defined him lay shattered beside his hand. Frank pushed himself up, feeling blood trickle from a wound above his brow. His vision blurred in and out, but one thought cut through the haze. "Annie!" He staggered to his feet, stepping over debris and fallen comrades. The once bright halls of the haven were unrecognizable. Monitors shattered, flames reflecting off broken glass, alarms flickering weakly before dying one by one. The smell of burnt circuitry filled the air. He passed by walls carved with bullet holes and scorch marks. Somewhere, he could still hear faint cries, heroes calling for help, or maybe ghosts echoing through the wreckage. And then, movement. A faint light shimmered beneath a pile of debris. Frank rushed forward, shoving aside metal panels until he saw it. Raven, crushed under rubble but still alive, his mask cracked open to reveal one piercing eye. "Frank!" Raven's voice was barely a whisper. "You're still breathing. Good." Frank fell to his knees, trying to lift the debris. "Hold on. I'll get you out." Raven's gloved hand gripped Frank's wrist, stopping him. "Listen, there's no time. Helix didn't just attack us, they erased us. Every file, every record, every agent's ID, gone. To the world, we're ghosts now." Frank froze. "Annie, where is she?" Raven looked away, pain flickering in his expression. "Taken, or worse. Luther wanted her alive. That means she's still valuable. Find her, before they finish what your father started." "My father?" Frank demanded, his voice breaking. "What does that mean?" Raven coughed, blood staining the cracked glass beside him. "Your father's final mission wasn't to destroy Helix. It was to become them." Frank stared at him, stunned. "Project Mirror Mind," Raven continued weakly. "It wasn't just a defense system. It was a conversion protocol. A way to turn minds into weapons, programmable, controllable, undying. Your father tried to shut it down, but part of him became the system." A cold chill ran through Frank's veins. "You're saying my father is part of Helix?" Raven's hand slipped, his voice fading. "Find the Nexus chamber. The truth lives there." Then silence again. Raven's breathing slowed, and his hand went limp. Frank sat there for a long moment, the fire around him dimming, the world shrinking to a heartbeat. Then he closed Raven's eyes gently, whispering, "I'll finish it. I swear." Hours later, the smoke thinned enough to reveal the damage. Bodies of fallen heroes lay beneath the shattered insignia of the haven. Frank moved through them silently, collecting whatever data chips he could salvage. Half-burnt mission drives, damaged weapons, and a cracked photo of his father holding him as a child. The world above had no idea what had happened down here. Helix had erased every trace. Frank pulled a small radio from the wreckage and tried to contact Elias. Nothing but static. Then, a faint buzz. "Frank!" He froze. The voice was faint, female, distorted, but unmistakable. "Annie, where are you?" "Frank, they're moving me, North Sector, old subway." "Helix has." Static. Then silence. He slammed the radio against the wall. The spark of hope turned into fire in his chest. Annie was alive. He scavenged what he could, armor fragments, a weapon from a fallen soldier, and followed the faint coordinates left on the radio signal. The tunnel stretched endlessly beneath New York, cold and echoing with the hum of distant generators. As he walked, flashbacks hit him like fragments of memory. His father's smile, Annie's laugh, Raven's words. "Nothing comes for free, Frank. Especially not the truth." The deeper he went, the more signs of Helix he saw, scorched walls, cables embedded in concrete, and holographic warnings flickering like dying ghosts. Finally, the tunnel opened into a massive underground facility. Blue lights pulsed along the floor, leading toward a sealed metal door marked Nexus Chamber, authorized personnel only. Frank's pulse quickened. Raven's last words echoed in his mind. He pressed his palm to the scanner. To his shock, it beeped green. The door hissed open. Inside was a vast circular chamber, filled with floating digital panels, cables descending from the ceiling like veins of a living machine. In the center, a single glass capsule glowed, and within it, a figure stood motionless. Frank stepped closer. The figure turned. It was his father. Eyes open, breathing steady, but his face, cold, mechanical, emotionless. "Welcome home, Frank," the man said, his voice layered with static. "You shouldn't have come here." Frank's knees weakened. "Dad." The man's gaze softened, for a second. Then, it hardened again. "You are the next phase. Project Mirror Mind was never destroyed. It evolved. And now, you must choose. Serve Helix, or join the dead." Before Frank could answer, the alarms blared again. The entire chamber flashed red. From the shadows above, Luther's voice echoed, calm, mocking. "Welcome to the other side, Maccury. The war isn't over, it's just beginning." The capsule lights intensified, and Frank's father's form flickered, half human, half hologram. The ground began to shake as the chamber powered up around him. Frank gritted his teeth, shouting over the noise, "I'll save you, both you and Annie." His father's voice responded, cold, final. "Then you'll have to destroy me first." The chamber exploded in blinding light. The explosion had thrown Frank across the chamber, his body slamming into cold metal. Sparks rained from the ceiling, painting the smoke in orange streaks. The air smelled of ozone and burning circuitry. He groaned, pushing himself up. The room around him was no longer quiet, it was alive. The Nexus chamber pulsed like a beating heart, panels shifting, cables retracting, and holographic symbols flickering across the walls. At the center of it all stood his father, or what was left of him. Half human, half projection, his form glitched in and out, light rippling across metal veins that disappeared into the floor. "Frank," the voice said, calm and echoing through the digital storm. "You shouldn't have come." Frank's chest tightened. "You're alive." "I thought." "I'm not alive," his father interrupted. "I exist between worlds, mind and machine. Helix needed a host, and I became the vessel." Frank shook his head, trying to steady his voice. "They used you. They completed me." The voice carried an eerie serenity. "What you see as corruption is evolution. Humanity is chaos, Frank. I chose order." "Order?" Frank snapped, stepping forward. "They destroyed the Haven. They killed Raven. Annie's missing because of them." His father's expression flickered, a brief ghost of sorrow. Then it was gone. "Annie was never meant to survive. She carries the fragment, the final key to Mirror Mind's full awakening." Frank froze. What fragment? Before he could demand more, the chamber shook violently. The holographic screens shifted, revealing new data lines, Annie's DNA profile flashing on one of them. Project Mirror Mind. Final sequence active. Frank's heart pounded. "They're using her." His father's voice softened. "She holds the organic interface. Without her, the system can't achieve full consciousness. You were both part of it from the beginning. One code, two halves. Frank staggered back, the world spinning. No, that can't be true. It is. The experiment that gave you your reflexes, your endurance, it wasn't military training. It was me. You were my prototype. Frank felt the floor drop beneath him, the revelation hitting harder than any physical blow. His entire life, his pain, his strength, engineered. You turned me into a weapon, he whispered. His father's flickering eyes glowed faintly blue. I gave you purpose. Frank clenched his fists, trembling. Then I'll give you something, regret. He lunged forward, smashing his fist into the control console. Sparks exploded, and alarms blared. The hologram flickered violently, his father's image glitching as systems went offline. But before Frank could strike again, the floor cracked open. A swarm of drones burst upward, silver, spider-like machines with red sensors and needle arms. They surrounded him in a heartbeat, humming in unison. System defense protocol initiated. The AI droned. Frank ducked as one fired a plasma bolt. He rolled, grabbed a metal rod from the debris, and slammed it into a drone's core. Sparks flew, it exploded, lighting up the chamber. He fought like a cornered beast, fast, brutal, desperate. Every punch was a defiance of his programming, every move a rejection of the machine that made him. But there were too many. As he swung again, one drone wrapped its tendrils around his wrist, another around his throat. They lifted him off the ground, pinning him midair. The holographic form of his father approached, calm, emotionless. Stop resisting. You'll only prolong the pain. Frank choked out, You always taught me to fight back. He slammed his knee into the drone's chassis, twisting until metal cracked. It sparked, lost grip, and fell. He landed hard, rolling to grab a fallen soldier's weapon, a Helix pulse rifle. He fired. One shot. 2, 3. The drones fell in a rain of molten shards. Then, silence again, except for Frank's ragged breathing. His father's hologram flickered, stabilizing with visible strain. Impressive. You've surpassed my projections. Frank leveled the rifle. You made me. Now you'll unmake me. You can't destroy what you are, the hologram said, voice rising. You carry Helix within your cells. Every victory brings you closer to what they want you to be. Frank hesitated. His hands trembled. No. Soon, his father said softly, you'll understand. The only way to save Annie is to become Helix. Before Frank could reply, a wall behind him shattered, a beam of red light slicing through the chamber. Soldiers stormed in, wearing Helix insignia, black armor, face shields, moving in perfect sync. And leading them, a tall, silver-haired man in a long coat. Luther. Still breathing, Maccury? Luther's voice echoed, calm and cruel. Good. You're right where we want you. Frank turned, rage and exhaustion blending into something feral. You'll regret this. On the contrary, Luther smirked, stepping forward. You're about to meet your successor. From behind him emerged a figure, humanoid, armored in reflective plating, its face hidden behind a dark mask. The same mask Frank once wore, but colder. The figure's eyes glowed faint blue. Frank's blood ran cold. Meet Subject X, the perfected version of you, Luther said. No emotion. No hesitation. Pure efficiency. The clone tilted its head, scanning Frank. Target confirmed. Engaging. The fight that followed was chaos made flesh. Frank moved on instinct, blocking a flurry of strikes, every impact shaking his bones. Subject X was faster, stronger, smarter. It mirrored his every move, like fighting his own reflection, but without restraint. Metal clashed against flesh, sparks lighting the chamber like lightning. Frank ducked, countered, struck, but every hit he landed was returned twice as hard. Finally, Subject X caught his arm mid-punch and slammed him into the wall. Luther smiled. See, Frank. Even your rebellion is predictable. Frank spat blood, forcing a smile. Guess you forgot. I improvise. He reached for the shattered console beside him, ripped out a sparking cable, and jammed it into the floor. Electricity arced across the chamber, straight into Subject X's armor. The clone convulsed, sparks bursting from its mask, and fell to its knees. Frank collapsed beside it, panting. The entire facility began to tremble, red lights flashing faster now. Luther cursed under his breath. Enough of this. He turned to retreat, shouting to his soldiers, "Seal the chamber!" Frank crawled toward the center, watching his father's hologram flicker one last time. "Find the girl," his father whispered. "And remember, Helix isn't the enemy. The enemy is what comes after." Then, everything went white. The first thing Frank felt was silence. No sound, no warmth, no pain. Only the emptiness between two worlds. His eyes fluttered open to a pale white ceiling, perfectly sterile, humming faintly with electricity. The smell of disinfectant burned his nostrils. He tried to move but found his arms restrained, metallic cuffs locking him to a table. He was alive. Or something pretending to be. Tiny streams of data pulsed across his veins, glowing faintly beneath his skin. A screen above his head projected fluctuating vitals, but they weren't human. His heartbeat was irregular, syncing with a digital pulse. Subject 07, stabilization complete. Neuralink pattern, active. Voices echoed around him, calm, emotionless, mechanical. Figures in white lab suits moved behind a glass wall. Helix scientists. One of them tapped a holographic screen. Increase neurofrequency. Let's see if the hybrid consciousness holds. Frank's vision blurred as a sharp pain seared through his skull, a flood of memories crashing into him all at once. Flashes of Raven's mask. His father's voice. Annie's laughter. The explosion. Then static. He screamed, pulling against the restraints with all his strength. The metal groaned but didn't break. The lead scientist leaned closer to the glass. Fascinating. His neural resistance has grown beyond projected levels. Inject the inhibitor before. The lights flickered. Then they went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Only the faint red emergency light remained, painting everything in blood hues. Somewhere beyond the walls, alarms started blaring, but not Helix alarms. A deeper, foreign tone. Frank's head pounded. "Annie," he whispered. Suddenly, a voice answered through the static. Quiet, trembling, familiar. "Frank, if you can hear this, don't move." His heart froze. "Annie." The cuffs clicked open one by one, as if by invisible hands. The locks hissed, and the metal arms retracted into the table. "I hacked into their control grid," Annie whispered. "You're in Sector 6. But you don't have much time. They know you're awake." Frank sat up, muscles trembling. "Where are you?" "Close," she said. "But I'm not the same anymore, Frank. They tested on me too." Frank's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" A pause. Then, "Just get out. Follow the blinking corridor. I'll meet you at Gate Delta." The speakers cut off with a sharp buzz. Frank looked around. The lab door shimmered with a digital lock, a glowing pattern of numbers that shifted every second. He approached it carefully, placing his palm against the cold surface. A faint whisper echoed in his mind, not Annie's voice, but his father's. "Use it, son. Feel the current. You're more than flesh now." He hesitated. Then, closing his eyes, he focused. The lights around him flickered in rhythm with his heartbeat. Data pulses rippled through his veins again, and the lock on the door glowed brighter, reacting to his presence. He thought about opening it, and it obeyed. The door hissed open. Frank stepped into a narrow metallic corridor bathed in red emergency light. Smoke drifted through the air. In the distance, alarms wailed, and soldiers shouted orders. He moved silently, barefoot, his body aching but alive. His mind felt sharper, too sharp. He could feel the movements of people beyond the walls, hear faint data transmissions, sense frequencies humming through the air. It terrified him. But he couldn't stop. He turned a corner and froze. A figure stood at the far end of the corridor, backlit by flickering light. The reflection of a mask gleamed, black and angular. For a heartbeat, Frank thought it was Raven. But when the figure stepped closer, he saw it wasn't his mentor. The mask was older, cracked down the center, the eyes glowing white. The person's voice came through a scrambled vocoder. So the experiment lives. Raven would have been proud. Frank tensed. Who are you? The stranger tilted their head. A ghost from before Helix. You may call me Spectre. Are you with them? I was, Spectre said, until I saw what they became. Frank took a cautious step forward. Do you know my father? Spectre's silence said enough. Then, quietly, I trained beside him. He wanted to save you, but he couldn't stop the project once it began. Frank's heart hammered. Then help me end it. Spectre's voice softened, almost mournful. You don't end Helix, Frank. You outlive it. Before Frank could reply, distant gunfire echoed down the hall. Spectre turned sharply. They've found you. Move. The masked figure tossed him a dark cloak, tactical fabric embedded with stealth fibers. You'll need it more than I do. Frank caught it, nodding. What about you? I'll delay them. Find the girl. Then, before Frank could protest, Spectre sprinted toward the opposite corridor, drawing Helix fire as they vanished into the smoke. Frank ran. He followed the blinking floor lights, Annie's digital trail. The deeper he went, the stranger the facility became. The sterile labs gave way to glass tunnels filled with strange pods, people suspended in glowing liquid, their eyes closed. He pressed a hand to one of the pods. Inside floated a young man, face eerily familiar. Frank realized, with a chill, that it looked almost like him. Clones. Each one tagged with a nameplate. Subject X1, X2, X3. His pulse quickened. What the hell are they doing? He didn't get time to wonder. Ahead, a security door burst open, and Annie stumbled out, clutching a small black device. Her hair was shorter, her eyes sharper, but they burned with the same fierce intelligence. Frank, she gasped, rushing to him. He froze. You're okay. Not for long, she said, pressing the device into his hand. This is the core of Mirror Mind. It's what they were using me for. We can shut it down, or control it. Frank looked at the small, pulsing cube. It vibrated softly, almost like a heartbeat. Where did you? I stole it from Luther's private lab, Annie said. But they're coming. And there's something else. Frank, Dad's consciousness isn't gone. It's inside this. Before Frank could react, the walls around them shuddered, sirens flaring. The pods began to drain, hissing open. The clones inside twitched, their eyes snapping open one by one, glowing faint blue. Containment breach detected. Engage prototypes. Frank's breath caught. Run. They sprinted down the corridor, the floor trembling as the clones stepped out behind them, their movements stiff but deadly. Annie tapped furiously at her wrist interface, locking doors behind them as they fled. One clone managed to grab Frank's arm, identical face, blank expression. Error, it whispered. Primary source detected. Frank wrenched free and slammed his fist into its jaw. You're not me. They burst into an elevator shaft, sliding down a maintenance cable as explosions rocked the facility. Alarms howled. Red lights pulsed faster, blending with the pounding of Frank's heart. As they reached the lower level, Annie looked up, her eyes wide. Frank, the mirror core isn't just data. What do you mean? It's alive. A low, mechanical rumble echoed through the metal floors, deep and ancient. The walls began to pulse with light, and a single phrase appeared on every nearby screen. Mirror Mind. Reboot sequence initiated. The ground split open beneath them.